Hey, can I ask you something? Have you ever wondered why Liberia, a country with so much potential, still struggles with development after all of these years? I mean, we have a lot of natural resources, we have a vibrant population, but somehow progress is very slow and sometimes even feels stagnant. And that's why I've decided to come up with a development series on TikTok and on YouTube diving into what things can we do differently. And in order to successfully do this, I've identified four books that I want us to read through together as a group that I'm going to be pulling passages from and analyzing to help us do our development plan. The first book in this series is going to be by a Nigerian author called Chinua Achebe, and please forgive my pronunciation. It's called The Trouble with Nigeria. And this basically argues that in Africa as a continent, our problem is not a lack of money or resources, it's bad governance, corruption, and our leaders who prioritize themselves over the being of the country. And looking at Liberia and other countries, I can see how our leaders have shaped the country's path and how sometimes people get into those positions out of personal interest rather than the interest of serving the public as a whole. The second book in the series that we're going to be reading is called Why Nations Fail. And this one is written by an English and a Turkish author, Darren Asimoglu and James Robinson, who are both economics professors, and they talked about how countries fail when their institutions are extractive, so they serve few people and not the masses. And then looking at Liberia's history, which we've covered extensively on this channel, our political and economic systems fit that description, where historically they've only served a few rather than the masses as a whole. And with this book, we're going to look at institutional analysis, where we're going to look at exploring systemic and structural causes that has caused underdevelopment in the country. I would also like to add that Darren Asimoglu has a Nobel Peace Prize in economics. All right, and then our last two books are going to be from African women authors, and I'm very particularly excited to read Debt Aid. And Debt Aid is by Dembisa Moyo, who is an author and economist. She is super successful. And she writes this book about why aid is not working and how there is a better way forward for us as a continent in Africa. And we all know that Liberia has received tons of foreign aid, and we continue to receive tons of foreign aid, especially after our civil wars. But we also see that that aid isn't really getting us far, and we have actually gotten into the cycle of dependency rather than growth, and which is why I'm so excited to read and analyze that aid. My question is, how do we help our countries to develop while receiving aid without trapping it in a cycle of dependency that so many of our countries are falling into? I'm very excited for this one because I absolutely love finding African women author as an African woman who writes myself. So I'm excited to read this one. This last book, honestly, as I was researching what I wanted to end the series with, I stumbled across Wangari Maathai, who is a Kenyan author. She is also a Nobel Peace Prize, and I see a lot of my background in hers. She is a environmental activist. She's a women's rights activist. She is an activist for sustainable development. So I'm very excited to read this book. It's called The Challenge for Africa. And in this book, she argues that our problem as a continent isn't just because, sometimes we may lack resources in certain areas or our politics and politicians. She actually says that we've lost belief in ourselves and we lack unity. And as a result, it's leading us into what we're seeing on the continent. She talks about the remnants of colonization throughout the continent, the artificial borders that we've created, and how that causes more tribalisms and infighting and conflicts. She talks about how our nations are continuously pillaged and continue to be destabilized. And she talks about how there's responsible leadership, but we also have to take ownership about how we want to develop our nation. And now that I'm actually talking through these books, I might throw in one other book. And I felt like that's a great way to end this series because of the emphasis on our leadership and the need for them to serve the people within the continent rather than foreign interests. She is a big advocate for sustainable development, especially with all of our environmental resources and having environmental restoration, and as we're developing to do it sustainably. And I love sustainability studies. I have a degree in sustainability studies, so I am very, very excited for that piece. And while discussing this, honestly, I thought about throwing in one last bonus book, just depending on how things go, and that is on Black Skin, White Mask, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. About development vault, talking about the psychological impacts that colonization has had on us as a people and on the continent. And although Liberia wasn't colonized in the traditional sense of the word, we still had a settler elite system as a result of the settler colony that came over to Liberia. And I think it's going to be interesting for us to talk about the colonial hierarchies and how that still impacts our system, our class stratification that was as a result of what we saw in the country. So as we read through these books, I'm just going to like help us like with guided discussion questions on how we can critically analyze what we're reading. And why I'm having us read this book is because I don't think that we can approach a development framework without having a strong base of what we're trying to accomplish. And I did go through a lot of books on like Pan-Africanism and development, but I landed on these four. I felt like they were going to be easy reads and just really help us drive home the plot of making a strong development plans, looking at the challenges that we are going to encounter, and then what solutions have people who were much smarter than us have come up with, and then how can we continue to build on the ideas that they have established, and what can we learn from other countries on the continent that have gone through something similar. So again, I'm very excited about this. This is a passion project, and I'm going to work it into my schedule to start reading. And as I'm reading, I'll be posting like any thoughts that I have. So if you have any ideas or any suggestions to the book list and you think that some other books might work better, I'm all ears and I'm happy to like to mimic anything or to change anything. So yeah, I'm excited.